The BBC News Channel. More than just the headlines.
Tonight at 10, Austria becomes the first country in Europe to make COVID vaccinations compulsory as infection rates on the continent continue to rise sharply. Austria will return to a national lockdown next week, while Christmas markets in parts of Germany are cancelled because of what ministers there are calling a national emergency. But in the UK, there are hopes that relatively high vaccination rates and the booster programme could make a difference.
I wouldn't assume we are going to follow the same trajectory as Europe, but we're watching very closely and obviously there is concern.
We'll be live in Vienna with the latest, also in the programme. In an exclusive BBC interview, the man known as Europe's last dictator, President Lukashenko of Belarus, says he won't stop the flow of migrants through his country.
You, the jury, find the defendant, Kyle H. Rittenhouse, not guilty.
Cleared of murder, American teenager Kyle Rittenhouse, who shot dead 2 people last year during protests against racial injustice. And after the former Yorkshire cricketer Azim Rafiq gave evidence of racial abuse, the sport's top officials promise tangible action to tackle racism.
And coming up in the sport on the BBC News Channel, just weeks away from the start of the Ashes, Tim Payne has stepped down as Australia captain over explicit text sent to a female colleague.
Good evening. Higher COVID rates in Europe are bringing tighter restrictions in many countries. Austria has become one of the few countries in the world to make it compulsory for people to get vaccinated, and there'll be a national lockdown there from Monday. In Germany, the health minister says there's now a national emergency and a lockdown there can't be ruled out. Here in the UK, infection rates are still high, but falling, according to one new study. As our health editor, Hugh Pym, reports.
Looking ahead to Christmas.
Good evening.
Before then, the Austrian people are facing bleak winter weeks with a 20-day lockdown from Monday. They'll only be allowed to leave home for work, exercise or shopping for essentials. And vaccination against COVID will become compulsory in February.
Despite months of persuasive efforts, despite media campaigns, despite all discussions, we did not manage to convince enough people to get vaccinated.
At the start of the week, Austria planned restrictions on those who hadn't been jabbed, but infections carried on rising, and now a tougher set of measures.
I don't actually mind being at home. I have a job which I can do from home. It doesn't bother me much, but I will miss the cafe, of course.
There is no other way, even though I don't like it. In literature, you can read that pandemics last at least 3 years, and we should avoid that.
So will Germany follow Austria with lockdown restrictions? Ministers said nothing was being ruled out, and rising case numbers had created a national emergency. While UK daily cases relative to the population haven't surged, Germany's have accelerated and are now not far behind. The Netherlands and Austria have imposed different forms of lockdown as their infection rates soared. So what does this mean for the UK? Some argue that more immunity's been built up after previous infections and the rest of Europe is now following.
Maybe they are actually experiencing what some parts of the UK experienced a little bit earlier in the autumn, with Delta, with things opening up, and with the vaccines not fully kicking in, particularly for people in midlife. That may be the pattern. I wouldn't assume we are going to follow the same trajectory as Europe, but we're watching very closely, and obviously there is concern.
The latest infection survey from the Office for National Statistics suggests that in England last week, 1 in 65 people had the virus, lower than the previous week. In Wales, it was 1 in 55, also down. In Scotland, with 1 in 95 people, case rates were said to be broadly level. In Northern Ireland, with 1 in 65 people, the trend was said to be uncertain.
Entirely up to you which arm you want to have in.
Experts say the future path of COVID is hard to predict. Much will depend on the vaccine rollout. The Scottish Government says its certificate scheme has contributed to a small rise in take-up among young people, and it may be extended. As in all the UK's nations, case data will be watched as closely as ever. Hugh Pym, BBC News.
Well, our Europe correspondent Bethany Bell joins us now from Vienna. So, Bethany, many people in Austria have refused to get vaccinated. What's been the reaction then today to the news that they will now have to get the jab?
Frustration and anger, I think, sums it up. This move to make people have their COVID jabs is something that's very controversial here. Austria is the first country in Europe to contemplate such a move, and the government says it's because the vaccination rate is simply too low. It's estimated that around 2/3 of Austrians are fully vaccinated. Now, the government says that it is constitutional to have a compulsory vaccine, but opposition parties here are really protesting about this. The far-right Freedom Party is organising a demonstration tomorrow. It has campaigned very much on a platform of vaccine scepticism, and they say they will continue to fight this on the streets and in the courts. Other Austrians say it's simply time for everybody to get vaccinated.
OK, Bethany, thank you very much indeed. Bethany Bell there in Vienna. Well, here, the government's latest coronavirus figures for the UK show there were 44,000 new infections recorded in the latest 24-hour period. That is nearly 4,000 more cases than last Friday. So an average of just over 40,000 cases were reported per day in the last week. More than 8,000 people were in hospital with COVID as of yesterday. There were 157 deaths, that's of people who died within 28 days of a positive test, meaning the average number of deaths over the last 7 days was 148. The total number of people who've died with COVID now stands at 143,716. And on vaccinations, just over 88% of people aged 12 and over have now received a first dose, and 80% have been double jabbed. And more than 14.2 million people have now received their booster jab. The president of Belarus, Alexander Lukashenko, has said that he will not stop the flow of thousands of migrants through his country as they try to enter the European Union. In an exclusive interview with the BBC, President Lukashenko admitted that his armed forces may actually be helping migrants cross the heavily guarded border into Poland. Our correspondent, Steve Rosenberg, spoke to him at the presidential palace in Minsk.
It's not often you get the chance to meet the man who's been labelled Europe's last dictator. The West says Alexander Lukashenko is using migrants as a political weapon. We confronted him with claims his troops have been cutting border fences to help migrants into the EU.
Our guys are helping the migrants get into Polish territory. It's perfectly possible. I think that's absolutely possible. Maybe somebody helped them. I won't even look into this.
Thousands of migrants have been coming to Belarus to try to slip into Europe. Alexander Lukashenko denies bringing them here, but he warned the EU 6 months ago. You told the EU that Belarus had been stopping migrants, but that now they'd have to catch them themselves. The migrants took that to mean Belarus is open to them.
I told the EU I'm not going to detain migrants on the border, hold them at the border, and if they keep coming from now on, I still won't stop them. Because they're not coming to my country, they're going to yours. The West stopped talking to us and working with us. If you don't want to, then fine. We'll sort this problem out ourselves, as best we can.
This was Belarus last year. Alexander Lukashenko under intense pressure, accused of rigging an election and stealing the presidency. If, as you claim, you won 80% of the vote, then why is it that crowds of people came onto the streets? Not to congratulate you on your crushing victory, but to accuse you of stealing their votes. It doesn't make sense.
There's no sense in your head, Steve, or in the heads of your masters.
Mr. Lukashenko launched a brutal post-election crackdown on his critics and on civil society. We saw protesters being beaten, and we saw young people coming out of detention centres with injuries on their bodies.
Okay, I admit it.
You admit it?
People were beaten at the Akrestina detention centre. But there were police beaten up too, and you didn't show this.
Anyone who speaks out against you, who opposes you, you call a traitor or an enemy. Why?
They haven't betrayed me, Steve. They've betrayed Belarus.
Since July, 270 NGOs have been shut down in Belarus.
I'll answer your question with no bother. We'll massacre all the scum that you, the West, have been financing. Oh, you're upset that we've destroyed all your structures, your NGOs and all those that you've been paying for.
Europe doesn't see Mr. Lukashenko as a legitimate president. He claims not to care. A pariah in the West. He knows there's always President Putin's Russia to fall back on. Steve Rosenberg, BBC News, Minsk.
An American teenager who shot dead 2 people during protests against racial injustice in Wisconsin last year has been found not guilty of murder in a trial that polarised opinion in the United States. Kyle Rittenhouse argued that he had feared for his life and acted in self-defence. Prosecutors said he had behaved like an armed vigilante. Well, the case has provoked a heated debate about gun ownership. Our correspondent Nomia Iqbal reports now from the city of Kenosha.
The defendant will rise and face the jury and hearken to its verdicts.
A dangerous vigilante or someone acting in self-defence. After 26 hours, the jury decided Kyle Rittenhouse's fate.
We, the jury, find the defendant, Kyle H. Rittenhouse, not guilty.
The 12 men and women of the jury accepted the teenager's claim he killed out of fear for his safety.
Somehow, some way, those 12 jurors found that he was innocent.
Outside court, the political divisions this case has caused were clear.
You attack me, I have the right to defend myself. That's what Kyle was on trial for, and that's what Kyle is now found acquitted of. Okay, so you're telling me if two guys come up to you and accost you, you can't defend yourself? That's what was on trial today.
There is no way in a law and a land of law where a person can shoot 3 people, kill 2 of them, and be acquitted. There's just no way.
The shooting happened against the backdrop of nationwide protests over racism and police brutality following the murder of George Floyd. In Kenosha, another black man named Jacob Blake had been shot by police 7 times, and on the 3rd night of riots, Kyle Rittenhouse entered the city. He said he came to provide security.
Somebody hurt, I'm running into harm's way. That's why I have my rifle, because I can protect myself, obviously.
In a series of confrontations, he shot dead Joseph Rosenbaum, who had chased after him into this car park. He then killed another man who ran after Rittenhouse, thinking he was an active shooter. A 3rd man survived. Police later arrested the teenager and charged him with murder.
People right there.
At his trial, there were tears, challenges.
When you point the gun at someone else, that's going to make them feel like they're about to die, right? That's what you wanted him to feel.
No.
So why?
Shouting by the judge.
That was before the
Don't get brazen with me.
And a controversial defence by his team in regards to the shooting of Jacob Blake.
Other people in this community have shot somebody 7 times, and it's been found to be okay. And my client did it 4 times in 3/4 of a second to protect his life from Mr. Rosenbaum. I'm sorry, but that's what happened.
This case has become a big flashpoint on gun rights. Some see Kyle Rittenhouse as a hero. For others, he's a reckless teenager and a symbol of a gun culture out of control.
Well, Normia is in Kenosha live for us tonight. And Normia, this is a case that's been gripping America, really. What's been the reaction tonight to this verdict?
Well, the reaction has been division. This case has pulled together some of the most explosive issues in America: the right to bear arms, protests, racial injustice. There are civil rights protesters outside the courthouse who have said that if Kyle Rittenhouse had been a black teenager and had shot at 3 white people, the police would have behaved very differently that night. And the National Guard is on standby just in case there is any violence. President Biden has reacted. He has said that the verdict will leave many Americans feeling very angry and concerned, including himself, but he has urged people to respect the verdict. Now, Kyle Rittenhouse has reacted. He has said he is remorseful and wants to get on with his life. But for others, it may not be so easy. The family of one of the men shot dead that night have said that this not guilty verdict sends a dangerous message that any armed civilian can show up in any town and justify shooting people. So this political divide that we know exists in America on gun control and gun ownership has tonight got even deeper.
Normia, thank you very much indeed. The double-child killer Colin Pitchfork has been arrested and sent back to prison 2 months after he was released on licence, having served 33 years of a life sentence. Pitchfork was jailed in 1988 after admitting the rape and murder of 2 15-year-old girls, Linda Mann and Dawn Ashworth. It's understood he has been returned to prison for breaching his licence conditions. The England and Wales Cricket Board has promised far-reaching action to tackle racism after talks amongst the game's senior officials. It follows Azeem Rafiq's revelations of racism when he played for Yorkshire. Today, a former England player, Alex Hales, apologised for causing offence after a photo emerged of him dressed up in black makeup at a party in 2009. Our sports correspondent Laura Scott reports.
After another turbulent week, cricket's latest response to its racism crisis? crisis talks at the Oval today as the game joined forces in tackling its discrimination problem.
What do you hope to get out of the meeting today?
Just clarity and togetherness, I suppose.
Does cricket have a racism issue?
Well, we've got a lot of work to do, there's no doubt about it.
Last night, the former England cricketer Alex Hales became further embroiled in the scandal after a photo emerged showing him dressed in a racially offensive way at a fancy dress party in 2009. He said his appearance was a tribute to the late rapper Tupac Shakur, but apologised in a video message.
I deplore all forms of racism and discrimination. I've been incredibly lucky to play around the world in different backgrounds with players, different races, different cultures.
Earlier this week, there was widespread praise for Azim Rafiq as the whistleblower gave harrowing testimony to MPs about his experiences of racism in cricket and spoke of his hopes that speaking up would bring about change.
I'm very determined that this is going to be looked back as the moment where not only sport but society as a whole went in a different direction to what it's been going.
But the former Yorkshire player has been forced to front up to his own mistakes, apologising after Facebook messages from 2011 surfaced showing him using anti-Semitic language. In a statement, he said, "I have absolutely no excuses. I am ashamed of this exchange. I was 19 at the time and I hope and believe I am a different person today." He later apologised for another racially offensive social media post. Rafiq's own use of discriminatory language has been described as awkward by the Jewish Leadership Council, while others say it only serves to highlight the scale of the problem in cricket. Today came an acceptance within the game that collective action is the only way to resolve this crucial issue. In a joint statement following the meeting, cricket chiefs said they'd been shocked, shamed and saddened by Rafiq's experiences and committed to wide-ranging and tangible action. You talk about initial steps. The issue of racism and discrimination in cricket is nothing new. What makes this plan any different to previous plans?
Well, I think that will be the proof will be in how we deliver it. This will be the first time the game has come together to take such urgent and direct action.
Despite some counties having suggested a possible vote of no confidence in him, Harrison said he'd been backed today. English cricket's leadership have come up with a broad direction of travel, acknowledging the sorry state of the game needs addressing quickly. But with the soul and survival of the sport at stake, they must now translate those intentions into meaningful action. Laura Scott, BBC News.
Andrew Marr has announced he is leaving the BBC after 21 years, saying he is keen to get his own voice back. The 62-year-old journalist said he would now focus on writing and presenting political and cultural shows for the radio company Global and writing for newspapers. The United Nations has joined calls for China to give proof that missing tennis star Peng Shuai is safe and well. She hasn't been heard of since alleging that she was sexually assaulted by a former senior minister in the Chinese government. Well, tennis officials have dismissed an email supposedly sent by her saying the allegations were untrue and that she's all right. Our sports correspondent, Natalie Perks, has the story.
She is a tennis star in China, a former doubles world #1 who won Wimbledon.
Receiving their trophies from the Duke of Kent.
But now the United Nations has added its voice to the clamour of bodies all wanting to know the same thing. Where is Peng Shuai? 2 weeks ago, in this social media post, Peng Shuai made serious sexual assault allegations against former Vice Premier Zheng Gaoli. Like an egg hitting a rock or a moth to the flame courting self-destruction, I'll tell the truth about you, she said. Within half an hour, the post had gone, and so had she. Then an email surfaced, addressed to the chairman of the Women's Tennis Association, claiming to be from her, saying she hadn't meant the allegations and was just resting at home. But they're not buying it and are prepared to pull lucrative matches from China if they don't get proof she's safe.
I don't want to see this get pushed under the rug or on the side because, again, there's maybe bigger issues in some people's minds as to what's going on. I think the focus has to be on Peng in this situation.
23-time Grand Slam singles champion Serena Williams has tweeted she is devastated and shocked, adding this must be investigated and we must not stay silent. She's not alone.
We would like actually to hear like a video from her or something, like a real proof that yes, that she's all right.
The eyes of the world will be on Beijing in February for the Winter Olympics, but so far, the International Olympic Committee is only saying this requires quiet diplomacy.
The IOC must fulfil its claims and responsibilities in this case and demonstrate that athletes really are at the heart of sport. It has significant leverage and influence to exert in this case, especially with the Beijing Olympics just around the corner now.
In a country where few are allowed to challenge senior authorities without paying the price, concern grows by the hour for Peng Shui's safety. Natalie Perks, BBC News.
The Culture Secretary, Nadine Dorries, says people are afraid to say what they think on social media, as it's been hijacked by left-wing campaigners. In her first television interview since being appointed, she insists she does not want to start a culture war. Today she announced a further £100 million for the Culture Recovery Fund to help theatres and other venues in England recover from the pandemic. Well, Nadine Dorries has been talking to our culture editor, Katie Razzle.
She's got a new job. How does the crown fit?
Does it suit me?
Touring London's Young Vic Theatre, the new Culture Secretary Nadine Dorries. Famously outspoken herself online, she's attacked left-wing snowflakes who she says are suppressing free speech. Her appointment was met with criticism from some in the creative industries.
And a crime writer said the closest you get to culture is if you're eating a pot of yoghurt. What do you think was going on?
Lovely. There's this kind of image that's been painted of me that I'm going to go out in some kind of culture war battle. It just isn't true.
But them talking about left-wing snowflakes and their woke agenda is quite aggressive.
Well, there are some people who will politicise that. Campaigners who kind of hijack the space that young people would like to occupy to talk about some serious issues, who some on the left who've hijacked that space, and that's who my comments are targeted at.
Liverpool, the great Atlantic port of the north of England.
Nadine Dorries is Culture Secretary and a best-selling novelist whose books are based on her upbringing in a deprived part of Liverpool. She says she went hungry as a child and shared shoes to go to school.
And so I made it my ethos in the department within 24 hours of arriving. Every decision we take has a filter, and that is, does this policy help those from socially deprived areas to access both arts and culture and sport?
We express our solidarity with our Vietnamese.
She got a sneak preview at a rehearsal for the Young Vic's new play about political division in 1960s America. This theatre is one of 925 cultural organisations in England, the majority outside the capital, that she's today announced will share more than £100 million from the government's Culture Recovery Fund. It's the latest instalment to help them through the pandemic.
So just let's acknowledge what the government did, £2 billion. Many theatres would not be standing today if the government hadn't supported them over the last 20 months. The funding we're doing now is to help people through the recovery period.
Nadine Dorries has taken on the beasts in the TV jungle.
Oh, God, it's horrible!
It's the media jungle she's taking on now as she decides the price of the BBC licence fee over the next 5 years. She's long been a vocal critic.
You could hear the almond milk latte cups hitting the floor across the BBC when my job was announced.
But you want the BBC to survive?
Of course I want the BBC to survive. I'm British. You know, it's the best of British. Of course I want the BBC to survive. That's why we have to have those really hard discussions about how do we enable it over the long term to remain that global institution.
She's the 10th Culture Secretary in 10 years and says the reaction to her appointment was snobbish and sexist. Will her actions in the role change minds? Katie Razzle, BBC News.
Now, the BBC's Children in Need appeal has raised over £39 million in tonight's star-studded show from Salford. Pop star Ed Sheeran performed his new single to kick off the programme. The 3-hour telethon also saw a number of game show skits, including Oti Mabuse and Stephen Fry taking their turn in Graham Norton's red chair, and an unlikely first date between soap stars from EastEnders and Coronation Street. OK, that's it from me. Now on BBC One, it's time for the news where you are. Have a very good night.